Okay, we'll be recording. There are 4 Druze villages in the Golan. They're all in the northern part of the Golan. And the first Druze village of them all, and the largest, is Majd al-Shams, which means the Tower of the Sun. They can see the sun rising first because they are on the foot of Mount Hermon. You can see that it's a very steep city, and it simply climbs up the lower part of Mount Hermon. One moment.
What you did if you're
Okay. Hundreds of years ago, when the shepherds of Majd al-Shams took their flocks to the south, they didn't want to come all the way back to their village every night. So they made for themselves a temporary place to stay. And after a few years, this kind of morphed into a village known as Masadeh. The exact same thing happened again. And the new shepherd's village south of Masadeh was in a valley, which in Hebrew is Bik'ah or Baka in Arabic. And the new shepherd's village was called Bukata. You can spell it with a K. I still haven't figured out the Q part, but whatever works for you. And there's a 4th Druze village on the main road down to Kiryat Shmona called En Kinya, which we won't visit today. So the young residents of Bukata work in all sorts of jobs. Today, they're very academic. Most people go to college, but many people work afterwards in construction. And the older generation are mainly farmers, especially farmers with orchards of apples and cherries. And throughout the year, you can see the older Druze farmers selling their fruits in stands on the main road. So here's the CIA's famous map of the Golan. And you can see that at the very edge, at the tri-state border in the north of Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, is Mount Hermon, our highest mountain. But a little bit south of it is a little smaller mountain called Hermonit. And as we said, this can be translated as the Little Hermon, and it comes from the Arabic name for the 2 mountains. So Mount Hermon is mentioned in the Tanakh, so we keep the biblical name in Hebrew. But in Arabic, it's called Grandfather Mountain due to its white color during winter. For those of us who have white up here, you know what I'm talking about. And the next mountain south of Mount Hermon, about half its size, is called Grandmother Mountain. It's a little bit smaller. And between the 2 mountains is a beautiful volcanically formed lake called Birkat Ram, the High Lake. And in Arabic folklore, this becomes a whole story. Grandmother doesn't really trust grandfather when he's out and about on his own, so she keeps an eye on him, and that's the lake, which is perfectly round and blue. So adjacent to the mountain Hermonit to the west is this kibbutz called Kibbutz El Rome, which means the high kibbutz, and it calls itself the world's highest kibbutz with an altitude of just over 1,000 meters above sea level. And just across the street from the kibbutz is the road that will lead you to Hermonit, the big volcano, orchards and vineyards in the area, and also the battle site known as the Valley of Tears, or Emek HaBacha. Most of the big volcanoes in the area are in Israel, and the border is usually a bit to the east of what we call the volcano line. Here you can see, this is a picture taken this winter from the Chula Valley down below towards the east, towards Syria, and the border actually is on the far side of those volcanoes. And you can see where the snow line is here, about 800 or so meters above sea level. Israeli farmland goes all the way up to the border fence with Syria, literally. But when you look on the other side of the border, you see fields of nothingness. And for a farmer, which I used to be, this is sad. It's like, use your land, feed your people, make a living, help the green beat the brown. But for that, you need help from your country. And if you don't have that help, then it's a problem. During the long civil war that swept through Syria recently and uprooted literally millions of Syrians, you could stand anywhere near the border and see a war going on. And you could do this with a group, of course, not for every group, but some. It was somewhat, I guess you could say, partly educational and partly horrific. We were not in danger in any way, but people would say, I've only seen things like this in movies, but now I'm seeing this in real life. And hundreds of thousands of people lost their life. And yet on the other side of the fence, same terrain, same weather, same possibilities, there's so much goodness going on. And especially the goodness of grapes. Grapes are grown all over Israel. And of course, that includes wine grapes. And they're even grown in the desert. I suggest you try desert wine next time you come to Israel. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. But the Golan Heights has several advantages over the other areas. And one of those advantages is the basalt rock that covers most of the Golan. Few people know it, even Israelis, but Israel has about 70 volcanoes, and every plus that you see here is a volcano. Almost all of them are in the Golan Heights, not all, but most, but especially the Golan Heights. And therefore, when you have volcanoes, you have, well, besides some being fascinating windows into our geological past, they're also important for security. Let's pretend that you had neighboring countries with people who wanted theoretically to attack you. So being on top of a volcano is good for early warning, intelligence gathering, defending the area in case of attack. And since all of our volcanoes are dormant, there's very little danger of eruption. But the true lovers of volcanoes are farmers. Mainly farmers who grow fruit trees, but especially farmers who grow wine grapes. And it's not just in Israel, it's all over the world. But in Israel, specifically in the Golan Heights. So let's talk just a little bit about soil and what a vineyard needs in order to be successful, to last, to give good wine grapes. The soil composition of vineyards, perhaps the biggest, most important consideration when planting a grapevine. The soil supports the root structure of the vine. It influences the drainage levels and the amount of minerals and nutrients to which the vines are exposed. This picture is not taken in Israel, okay? It's rare to see this in Israel, and you'll never see it practically in the Golan Heights, because the ideal circumstance for a vine is an area of thin topsoil and subsoil that sufficiently retains water, but also has good drainage, so that the vine roots don't become overly saturated. A lot of terrible things happen to farmers when there's too much rain, too much saturation. There are all kinds of terrible fungi that attack the vines, and it can destroy an entire vineyard, and it has. So you have to know where to plant, you have to know what to plant, and to make sure specifically that you have good drainage. The ability of the soil to retain heat and reflect it back up to the vine is also an important consideration as far as ripening the grapes. And that's, of course, very easy in the Golan Heights because most of the earth is dark or red and reflects back to the vine itself. So there are several minerals, as you see here, that are vital to the health of the vines that are good vineyard soils. For instance, calcium. You need to balance the pH level of the soil. Iron, which moves components that are essential for photosynthesis. Here's classic volcanic soil with a lot of iron. You can see the red there. What else do you need? Magnesium is an important part of chlorophyll. Nitrogen, which helps plants capture sunlight energy by photosynthesis. You remember that. Phosphates encourage root development, and potassium, which activates enzymes, improves vine metabolism, and increases its health for the next year's crop. Basalt, or basalt, bazelet in Hebrew, the well-known volcanic rock that makes up so much of the Golan, is high in all of those, specifically calcium, iron, and magnesium. And there are many wines all over the world that take pride in the fact that they are grown in volcanic soil. So imagine the dismay of some Israeli soldiers, many who were kibbutznikim, who after being attacked by Syria in the beginning of the Six-Day War, took back the Golan Heights on days 5 and 6 of the war. When they arrived at the Avital volcano crater, they found a makeshift kibbutz. Syria had allowed a terrorist group to train in the crater on how to attack a kibbutz. And they found signs in Hebrew for the dining room, the Chadar Ochel, the children's house, the kibbutz offices, and more. And attacks like this were actually carried out, for instance, in the 1980s. But the soldiers were dismayed, not just by the existence of such a horrific scene, but also by the fact that instead of using this dreamlike fertile field for farming, the terrorists were using it to learn how to attack civilians. And for farmers, that just doesn't make sense. This is the crater today. You can see that immediately after the first village nearby, Kibbutz Merom Golan, came and established itself nearby, they immediately planted apples on the left and vineyards on the right. And slowly, the wine grape vineyards are taking over many of the apples. But back to wine grapes. There's a very large vineyard that we're going to pass on our hike. This is it. On our way to our next stop. And it's special because it's an organic vineyard of Chardonnay wine grapes. One of the ways you can tell it's organic is from the weeds. Can you see? Look at where this man is kneeling here as he works the vines. You can see there's a lot of weeds. That's usually a sign that it is an organic vineyard. Here's another picture. You're going to have sheep and even horses or donkeys walk around your vineyard. They'll eat the grass. They'll fertilize the place. It's perfect. This, for instance, is a picture of a non-organic vineyard, which is most of the vineyards in the world. But look, you can't even see one weed whatsoever because it's all sprayed. And to each their own, everyone has their own way of doing things, their own worldview. But this specific vineyard that we're walking by is actually organic. So that's really nice to talk about being organic, but and about weeds. You know, if you have some weeds in between the rows of your vineyard, it's not going to be so bad. But what about these guys? This cute little animal is a kind of a field mouse. It's called a vole, V-O-L-E. And these guys wreak havoc for farmers. This is a problem for farmers, and it eats everything. What are you going to do against this guy? So you will notice that there are a number of boxes at the edges of the vineyard as you walk by. You don't put the boxes in the middle, you put them on the side. What are these boxes? This kind of reminded me of Iwo Jima, but here we have some folks putting up a barn owl box. This is something done all over the world. And it is for barn owls. These guys are the biggest helpers that farmers have today. They love voles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a midnight snack. So how does this work? Well, you could kind of sum it up by saying, you build it and they will come. Here is an article written by a bunch of people who started this project. One is my father-in-law, Shaul Aviel, and one, Moti Charter, is the brother of a Livnot Pashebre who lives in Kibbutz Eliyahu. And it was here in this kibbutz that has a number of organic fields that they tried this experiment. And they found that they were fantastic eaters of voles. And that when it actually started in alfalfa fields. They didn't start in vineyards. Alfalfa fields, they're much more of an acute problem. And they were able to, just by putting up those boxes, they were able to allow the barn owls to eat thousands of rodents a year. In the alfalfa fields of the Jordan Valley, the barn owl boxes were so successful that the yield of alfalfa with barn owl boxes went up by 20%, which is incredible. It doesn't cost anything. By the way, to spray and to put out poison costs a lot. And you have to buy new ones because you have to make it stronger every time. And it's also a health risk. Just by putting up these boxes, which are very cheap to make, you're able to raise your yield of 20%, by 20% in alfalfa. So these boxes were all over Israel, you can see here, and not just in alfalfa fields, or not just in organic fields, but the project has become regional because you can get the voles out of your field, but if you are near, for instance, the Kingdom of Jordan or the Palestinian Authority, and they're not doing it, then all those voles are going to say, hey, there's a great field over there, let's go and eat there. So this project began to work. That's my father-in-law over there who was head of the project for many years in Kibbutz Eliyahu with the blue shirt. And they brought in farmers from the Kingdom of Jordan and some from the Palestinian Authority to learn how to work with the barn owl boxes. And it worked very well, except when they put them up in Jordan and the PA, there was a problem because kids and some adults started throwing rocks at the boxes. Now, why would they do that? Well, it turns out that what is in the West a black cat, in Arab culture, is the barn owl. And so they thought it was a sign of bad luck. And they wanted to get it out because it was a sign that something bad was going to happen to their fields. So in Israel, they printed up a number of posters and pamphlets in Arabic. Here on the left is the pamphlet in Hebrew, and they put it out in Arabic. They gave it to the farmers to give to their neighbors in Jordan and the PA, and the rock throwing stopped, at least that of the barn owl boxes. And on the signs, on the posters, it said, the barn owl is your friend. So this is actually part of the project in Abu Dhabi, which is now spreading. And it's a great idea. It's nature and humans working together. And it's a win-win situation, unless, of course, you're a vole. So not every wine lover thinks organic wine is great, but believe it or not, this specific vineyard that I was talking about, which is that we're walking by, owned by the Golan Heights Winery, actually won a gold medal, the best in Chardonnay in competition, which is pretty amazing. And not only the Golan Winery, but also the Tavor Winery. They have an eco line where they have also the barn owl symbol. And all over the world, people are now using barn owls and putting it on their bottles to show that they're trying to be friendly with nature. And still going on today. So let's talk about the very first winery. I'm not here to do any advertisement or even give opinions on what the best winery is. I have no idea myself, but today there's hundreds of wineries in Israel and scores of excellent ones just in the Golan. But the Golan Heights Winery was the first to understand this, to read the room, as it were, and turn the Golan into wine country. But moreover, it wasn't just the Golan. They were the ones who started the quality revolution in Israeli wines. Before that, this country was infamous for its syrupy wine. You may, if you're old enough, remember this wine, which was exported from Israel called Palwin, was big in England and in other places in Europe for people who wanted kosher wines. And people around the world thought that if the wine is kosher, it must be pretty bad. And in the army, in the IDF, this was the wine that was used. It is, you should not drink this wine. In the army, it was called the hammer wine. It's kind of obvious why. Today, there is no alcohol allowed in the army, so they use grape juice. But if you show this picture to someone who was in the Israeli army a while ago, they'll probably chuckle and remember a big headache that they had at some Friday night many moons ago. So in a way, all Israeli wineries owe a certain amount of homage to the Golan Heights winery. The winery's very creation was grassroots. It was started by the farmers of the Golan and not by an investor or someone who wanted to make money. These are people who just wanted to make a living farming. In the 1970s, the farmers were trying to find what is the optimal crop for the Golan. So the winery itself is owned by 8 kibbutzim and moshavim, which makes it quite special. The turning point came in 1972 when this man, whose name is Cornelius O., a renowned expert in the growing of wine grapes in UC Davis, University of California at Davis, he visited and surveyed Israel. Known to his friends as Corny, he first visited Israel in 1965 as part of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, but he loved Israel so much he came back to spend his sabbatical here. And the Israeli Agriculture Ministry asked him to return in the early 70s to make suggestions concerning viticulture, especially in the Golan Heights. And Corny, a third-generation Napa Valley man, concluded that the Golan Heights was an obvious place to produce high-quality wine because of its volcanic soil, its cool climate, altitudes, and the water that's available through drip irrigation systems that Israel is famous for. 4 years later, the Golan's first vineyards were planted right here. See, we're on the Golan Trail. There's the green, blue, and white tag. And this is among the very first of the quality vineyards that were planted here, thanks to Corny. Right next to the volcano that you can see behind the pole, known, as we said, as Hermonit. It was also the site of one of the largest tank battles ever held in the 1973 Yom Kippur War between the IDF and the Syrian army. What is ironic is that in the 1970s, there were many archaeological excavations going on in the Golan, and they found that the ancient Jews of the Golan grew wine grapes. So as great as Corny was for the state of Israel, and he was, if we had known our past a little bit better, we might have been able to figure it out for ourselves. And we do have to talk about the big battle. Many people, Israelis and non-Israelis, come to this place to see where a huge battle took place in 1973. And on Yom Kippur, many years ago, Syria decided to join forces with Egypt and launch a simultaneous all-out attack on Israel from the Golan Heights in the north and the Sinai Peninsula in the south. And they brilliantly managed to put Israel to sleep. And Israel brilliantly ignored all the signs that such an attack could take place. Now, a few tank commanders who felt otherwise asked and received permission to mobilize their forces and take up defensive positions while most of the army went home for the high holidays. And the Syrians, trained and led by Russian military advisors, decided to attack the Golan Heights in two places. The main thrust, there were two main thrusts. One is in the south, where they succeeded in this area known as Rafid, and the other, where they weren't successful, near our mountain, Hermonit, in what is called the Kunetra Valley, later called the Valley of Tears or Emek HaBacha. In both places, their main problem was to get past the volcanoes. If there had been no volcanoes, the Syrian tanks would have been able theoretically to traverse the Golan Heights much easier. But because the IDF held the high ground, literally, the Syrian tanks had to flank the volcanoes. And this is where the Israeli tanks stopped them, at least for a while. At 2 p.m. on Yom Kippur, the war began with cannon and airplane bombardment on Israel. And soon after, the Syrian tanks began rolling towards the border. Every circle of tanks here is 40, 80, 90, 100 tanks. Look on the blue side, on the Israel side, every tank represents a tank. It even has the name of the commander of the tank here. This is the exact number of tanks that Israel had here. And each circle here is scores and scores of tanks. And those are only the ones close to the border. There were thousands more behind, waiting to see which of the two thrusts would succeed. And then they'd have to decide, would they send the tanks through the area where they succeeded or through the area where they didn't succeed in order to have a pincer movement. Well, as I said in the beginning, even though Israeli troops were outnumbered, sometimes 4-1, sometimes 12-1, in one specific battle it was 30-1, they actually held the line. But at night, things took a turn for the worse. The Russian-made Syrian tanks had an infrared light that allowed them to see in the dark. Look at this red arrow. In the Valley of Tears, where we are on our hike, there are two tanks, a Russian-made Syrian tank. Here's the infrared projector, which allows them to see at night. And this is a British-made Centurion, which the Israelis changed and made a little better, but they didn't have night vision. Now, the American Army did have infrared tank projectors at the time, but for whatever reason, they would not sell it to Israel. And unfortunately, during that long, horrific night, many Israeli tanks were hit, and Syrian tanks crossed the border in the Rafid area. Here you can see where this number 2 is, and began slowly to penetrate the southern Golan Heights. But look at number 1. They weren't able to get past our little volcano known as Hermonid, which is this red dot here. Wave after wave of Syrian tanks, thousands, were not able to get past. The vastly outnumbered Israeli tank soldiers picked off the Syrian tanks, thanks to prearranged hiding spots on and near the volcanic mountain of Hermonid. And thanks to their excellent training and high standards, they were able to hold out. But how long can you go without sleeping? And that's a question to think. What's the longest you've ever gone without sleeping? And I mean, without help from substances, okay? What's the longest you've gone without going to the bathroom or without eating? They were already fasting on Yom Kippur. What's the longest you can go without drinking? You know, at some point, the odds are that you're going to get hit. And many did. So there were times that the Syrian tanks crossed the valley and tried to get past the volcano. And there were times that the Israeli tanks pushed them back into the valley. This is a picture from the war itself. And this is Mount Hermonid. And we're looking here to the west. At one point, something that was not supposed to happen happened. This is a modern picture, but it shows what happened. Every single Israeli tank ran out of shells. Now, in regular battles, the commander sends back tanks by rotation to rearm and get new shells. But the number of Syrian tanks was so high that the Israeli tanks were shooting nonstop. Boom, 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 boom. And they all ran out of shells together. This is the worst case scenario. The battalion commander, who survived the battle and received the highest medal of honor and became a household name, Avigdor Kahalani, even though it's long, told one of his sergeants to stand with his tank at the entrance of one of the riverbeds leading to the volcano and point his turret towards the approach. The sergeant wanted to tell his commander that this wasn't possible because he himself also ran out of shells. Now, Kahalani knew this, and he knew that this sergeant would say so but he didn't want Syrian intelligence to know, and he knew that they were listening in to their frequency. They were very, very good at that in 1973. And the tank communication system is built in such a way that when the commander is talking, nobody else can interrupt. So just as the young sergeant was about to say, "Sir, I'm out," Kahalani slammed down on his microphone button and told him, "I know your situation, but there is no choice." And Kahalani wrote later on, "This was such a terrible decision that I had to make because I knew I was sending him and his crew to their deaths." Now, why would Kahalani do such a dangerous thing to one of his own tanks? This is because both the Israelis and the Syrians knew that if the Syrian tanks here in red get past the few blue tanks of Israel, there's nobody behind them to stop them from rolling on down to the Jordan River and from there to the Galilee. And it almost happened. And one of the many miracles that happened here is that the Syrian tanks didn't try to attack the approach with that one tank who was standing without any ammo, just feigning, pointing his turret towards the Syrians. They decided, let's go up another way. Why try to go and get hit? It's easier for us to go to the other side of the hill. So after a few minutes, the tanks rearmed with new shells and they came back, relieved the sergeant who went to rearm himself, and they were ready to renew the fight. But the Syrian tanks, because they didn't go his way, went another way. They'd actually climbed up the approaches to the volcano, and now it was time they had to push them back. Kahalani ordered on the radio, his sign was policeman stations, that was their call sign, and he said, "Policeman stations, follow me, attack, charge," and he roared forward towards the Syrian tanks. And he looked behind him and he saw that he was all alone. One of the other commanders wrote afterwards, "When I was in battle, and I was brave like everyone else. But once I left to rearm, I really didn't want to go back and fight again. I felt like if I did, I would most certainly die." Kahalani realized that his unit was scared. At this point, he became a kind of unit psychologist. Instead of insulting his soldiers, I'm reminded of Patton, he said something differently. He spoke over the radio and he said this: "Policeman stations, look at the enemy tanks. See how they are fighting bravely. What, are you scared of them?" Note that he did not say, "You cowards, get off your butts and start rolling forward, or I'll put you in jail, or I'll shoot over your heads." He simply complimented the enemy and asked a question: "Are you scared?" One of the commanders of one of the tanks later said, "When he told us to charge forward, I really didn't like it. But when he hinted that we were scared, that ticked me off so much that I simply had to roll forward. I was so mad at him." And the unit moved forward, took over the previous positions, and after 3 days and nights, just think about that, 3 days and nights of nonstop fighting, the Syrians finally retreated back to Syria. The Battle of the Kunetra Valley was over. And at first light, this is a very iconic picture, the soldiers looked down at the expansive valley below and saw hundreds and hundreds of Syrian tanks and trucks and vehicles all destroyed. Some armies might have celebrated at this moment, but the Israeli soldiers were not happy. First of all, they were exhausted. They were all in shock, and they knew that they had lost many of their friends. Using a verse from the famous Kabbalat Shabbat poem written by Shlomo Alkabetz, who lived in Tzfat, who took this idea from Psalms and Isaiah, he called the site the valley, they called the site the Valley of Tears, Emek Habacha. Even if you win in a war, in some way, you lose. And when the Syrians retreated after 3 days and the battle was over, one general got on the army radio and told Kahalani, "You have saved the people of Israel." This was not some dramatic description of the battle. it is to be taken literally. The entire state, as it were, was hanging on this battle. Today, this is the place that we get to while we're walking through the vineyards. You can see it's surrounded by vineyards, and these are the names of the people who fell. And every year, right before Yom Kippur, Kalani himself, here sitting on a chair, speaks every day for about a week to all high school kids coming from all over the country who come to hear some of the stories from the Yom Kippur War in order to learn various lessons. And he tells his story right here, exactly where the battle took place, telling his own personal story to the kids. So if we want to sum up, what do we focus on during this hike? I mean, is this a vineyard hike? Or maybe this is a military history type hike because it took place here, one of the biggest tank battles since World War II? And the answer, of course, is yes. And I'll explain this yes with a story. In the late 1980s, I remember that instead of fields across the street from Kibbutz El Rome, there was a minefield here with this famous sign that you see in various places in the Golan. It was fenced off and it was well marked. And once when I was doing reserve duty in the area, as we drove from the kibbutz to do a patrol on the Syrian border, about a mile east of here, we saw an old Druze shepherd walk with his sheep straight into the minefield between the barbed wire that made up the fence. And before we could even react, one of the soldiers in our Jeep, a very young man with a huge heart, but somewhat impulsive, jumped out of the car and ran straight into the minefield to rescue the old man and his flock. And this, of course, is also known as worst case scenario. The Jeep driver started honking furiously. The rest of us, when we realized what was going on, hurried out of the car, ran up to the fence and started screaming at them, stop, stop, right where you are. And lucky for us all, they did just that and did not move. Meanwhile, we had to call the combat engineers to come in and rescue them. And this is how they do it. They come in with these huge sandals that spread the weight of a person over a large area, so that even if you do step on a mine, and it's an anti-personnel mine, it will not set it off. But of course, they're also walking with metal detectors here, and this is how they rescue them. So that doesn't seem to have any relation to what I was talking about, but a few years later, the minefield was picked up. That's the term that they use when the combat engineers come and they destroy the minefield, which is what they're doing in most of the minefields of Israel. It's considered old school. Mines don't really work. They usually hurt the people who put them down more than they do the enemy. So they're really pretty much not used today. And they had picked up this minefield and tilled the land. They plowed it and they planted a vineyard there. And when I saw this for the first time, I thought to myself, this is what Isaiah was talking about when he said, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And I kind of feel that the opposite of war is not the lack of war. If you ask me what the opposite of war is, it's farming. As a former farmer, I really believe that. The opposite of terrorism isn't not killing innocent people who are strangers to you. The opposite of terrorism is doing good deeds for innocent people who are total strangers to you. Because when you are a farmer, you grow food, but you have no idea who's going to eat it. You simply create food for the world. And that, in my opinion, is the opposite of killing. And of course, I'm not talking about a defensive war, which is important, but I think there is actually a beautiful story to be, a beautiful lesson to be learned here, and a kind of fulfilling of this biblical prophecy, which really is very beautiful. Thank you for being with us today. And One moment. If anybody has any questions or comments or suggestions, feel free to speak your mind.
Michael, please. I missed out 2 or 3 minutes of the recording at the very beginning. Could you show us the first 2 maps that you showed and I missed on the recording?
Sure.
Thank you.
This is the Golan Trail in red and in blue, each segment. We are talking specifically about number 4. And it is the red area here. This is segment number 4. Each one is very well mapped out. And you can get a lot of good information in English on the web. And also important is in those places, it's actually all over Israel, not just in the Golan. It's more important in the desert areas and in the huge canyons, but there's a new nonprofit called SOS that has put in a number of Wi-Fi areas where there's no reception, so that if people need, for whatever reason, some kind of an emergency, they're able to get close to these red SOS signs and are able to call for help. And that's also true for the Golan Trail itself.
This was wonderful. Thank you, Michael. I learned so much. I loved what you had to say at the end about how it fulfills the prophecy. I never would have thought of it that way. And yet when you said it, it fits perfectly. It's really beautiful. So thank you.
Toda rabba.
Michael, I was muted. I was trying to say that chitatul charvotam li'itim is related to the color of wine is the color of blood.
Ooh, yafet.
Wow. Michael, hi.
Toda.
It's
Yes.
Diane
Yes,
Wall.
Diane.
I'm sorry I got on so late and I enjoyed your session 2 weeks ago and this was phenomenal. I was just telling my son, I'm so glad that it's recorded. How long does it take for me to watch the recording?
Should be something like 40 minutes,
Oh, really?
give or
Oh,
take.
great. So I can look at it again tonight. Oh, fantastic.
Yes, we'll send it out to those who need it.
Oh,
and,
excellent. Thank you so, so much.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Please send it to me, Michael. I was also late.
בסדר גמור. It's Sunday.
Thank
You
you.
got to get into the groove of the new week. It's not easy.
Thank you so much.
So,
I want to
Shavuot
hike that
tov.
trail.
Yes,
I want to hike that trail.
b'simcha.
So informative. I love it. Thank you so much. I agree with him.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Jennifer from 1995, leave a note.
I remember.
And you look exactly the same.
So do you.
Thank you. Can you just tell me where we hiked the 3-day hike?
Yes.
Where on the map? Because that's been burning in my mind for 25 years.
Yes, so we will do that on one of these sessions, but that is the sea to sea hike. Let me get back a map here and I'll share the screen here and you'll be able to see it.
Not yet.
So we usually start here, if you can see the cursor, a little north of Tiberias. And the first day of the 3-day hike, we walk north until we get underneath Tzfat. And then we walk another day about halfway across the country till Ma'alot, where if you remember, we had a big bonfire and people had to stay up at night and everybody remembers that. And the last day, which is the day when everybody has blisters, we limp our way to the sea just north of Nahariya. And this is a hike that we still do, and it's still offered, and it's still great, and it's still green, and it's still safe, and it's still beautiful. So you can come back with the next generation and do it too.
Yeah, yes, that is the intention. So I'll be writing you a private email about that.
B'simcha.
Okay. Thank you
Okay.
so much. This is wonderful.
B'kasha.
Michael, this is Bob Mednick. We missed the first session, my wife and I, and we're now very, very sorry we missed it because this was great. I just was wondering, after the battle, the way you described it, and I knew something about it, but not the way you described it at all. I wonder if the IDF soldiers who participated somehow came together after that and for some period of time just to be with each other and to relive their experience. I mean, we know that happened somewhat in the old city. I'm wondering if it happened or it was such a bad experience they just went home and didn't want to think about it again.
From people that I've talked to, unfortunately, of course, in the 1970s, PTSD was not something that was known about. And for instance, anybody who was a captive and came back after the POW exchange was not treated nicely and were interrogated as if they failed. There was a pretty much lack of understanding and sensitivity. Some of the soldiers really didn't want to see each other. There's one of the classes that we gave last year was on a battle that about 30 soldiers were kind of stuck in a bomb shelter, a little tiny shelter together. And they said, you know, the commander was trying to keep them optimistic. And he said, guys, when we get out of here, well, some people were making jokes about dying because it's one of the ways that you deal with danger. And he was so mad at them. He said, shut up. Don't talk like that. They were saying things like, we'll meet in Har Herzl, really terrible things, but it's their way of dealing with it. And so the commander said, shut up. I don't want to hear any of this talk. When we get out of here, when we get out of here, I'm going to have a big party in my home in Jerusalem with the best food that my mom is going to help make. And nobody wanted to come. They were so depressed. It took about 25 years. Something happened after 25 years. I don't know enough about psychology and psychiatry, though I'm sure many people could explain it. But after around 25 years, people started writing blogs, their diaries of the war. They started processing it. One man who was one of the commanders of a terrible, terrible battle and had blamed himself for many of the bad things that happened. He'd lost his job, his marriage, and his whole family were crumbling. And after 25 years, he had the wherewithal to actually go back to the Ministry of Defense and ask, which was his legal right, for professional help. And a young psychologist helped him. And he started writing a book, which is a very well-known book, where he starts dealing with it for the first time. Today, the IDF already, when you finish a battle, they already have psychologists ready. Even before, they don't allow you to go home directly. You have to sit with your buddies and process what happened, and then you can go home. Because people often won't want to come back. And therefore, because of, unfortunately, the knowledge that's been accumulated on how to deal with it, this is less of a problem than it was. I'm not saying it's not a problem, it is. Today, many people who are civilians have PTSD from terrorist attacks, etc. That's true all over the world. But today, at least in the framework of the Army, it is taken care of officially in a very professional way. Back then, there was also this macho thing in the 70s that were really tough, and we don't cry at funerals and we don't have to show emotions. And Israelis have changed. I remember when I was in Lebanon and I was with my unit, we went into a house. All of southern Lebanon, the civilians had left, and we went into a house for shelter. And we found a magazine that was above where the television was. And it was a Hezbollah magazine with an envelope at the end for donations. And they were trying to get people to donate to Hezbollah, the Lebanese civilians. And we paged through this fascinating, terrible, horrific magazine, and we saw two kinds of pictures. One was pictures of dead Israelis, which they paraded around Beirut. And the other was, it was fascinating, pictures of Israeli soldiers crying at funerals. Now, this was 2006. By that time, it was fine to cry. It's okay to cry. We're not into the macho thing anymore. We're past that. But in Hezbollah's eyes, the weakness of the Israeli army was that they were too emotional, that they cried. What we're proud of, they thought that was a selling point for getting people to give them money for their organization. And it's in those moments that you realize the difference of our culture, our background, the Jewish people, the things that we've grown up with, our values. It really shines, unfortunately in an icky way, but really things have changed. But a lot has happened between 1973 and 2006, and things, as far as that goes, I think things are better now.
Do you know the name of the book, Michael?
Yes, it's in Hebrew. It hasn't been translated into English. It's by Menachem Ansbacher, and it's called Retzisim Mimagash HaKetzef, which means shards from the silver platter. There was a famous poem that was written after the War of Independence that the soldiers who passed away who have died during battles, this poet said, that's the silver platter on which the state of Israel was given. And he was talking about the shards of the silver platter. It's a very, very terrible, great book. And that's the good and bad part about this hike. But that's part of the world today.
Michael,
Yes.
was this discussion that you were just doing, was this about Telsaki?
Yes.
It was.
That's about Telsaki, and that book is about Telsaki.
I put in the chat, if any of you listen to the Israel Story podcast, Sipo Israel and Israeli in Hebrew, but there's an English version that's really, really good. And there is at least a 1-part, maybe longer, maybe 2-part episode about Telsaki, about this area we've been talking about. And it's really, really interesting. And it talks about this guy, Ansbacher, that you mentioned.
Ansbacher, yes.
He's and about the book he wrote, but I mean it's really, really moving. If you just go to israelstory.com.
Israel Story. I will write that down.
I think it's 64. If you just look up Telsaki, it's Tellsaki, I think.
K-I, right. And Bob, I wanted to tell you about Telsaki, which is a different battle. They get together every year on Memorial Day and tell kids about what happened to them. And they all say that today it's their therapy. What back then they wouldn't have thought, well, I'm going to come talk to kids, let them read a book. But now they come back, they drive all the way up to the Golan Heights, and they get together and tell their story. And every one of them says it's their way of continually dealing with it, which is a positive thing, I think. So, well, thank you, Ruthie, for that information.
Michael,
Shalom, Stu.
how are
Good
you,
to
my
see
dear
you.
friend?
It's been a long time.
Yeah, it was the last time I saw you at an ice cream shop in Tzemach. Can't remember.
Yes,
It was a long
yes,
time ago, so
yes. I was there for many hours, actually.
just waiting for me to show up.
Just waiting, just waiting.
It's so wonderful to be again on one of your on a tiyul with my favorite madrich.
Toda.
Even were the whole thing to be muted, I would still be inspired.
Toda rabba.
Ain't come off up.
Thank you. I figured the picture of the horses in the vineyard would make you smile.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I have some pictures I'd like to show you, to send to you, but
Simcha.
somehow I don't have your cell phone number. So
Oh,
maybe you can send it to me.
sure. I'll do that right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so
בסדר
much.
גמור.
Love it. I can't wait
Okay.
for another installment.
Toda. Shavua tov to everybody.
Michael, you see what's
Thanks so
behind
much.
me?
What? I didn't hear.
Do you see what's behind me up on the wall?
It looks like a sword.
It's a propeller.
A pro-
You have yet to visit me. Okay, it's shayach to what I'm about to send you.
Okay. It doesn't have to
Okay.
do with the turbines that are in the Golan Heights.
No, it's a much
Yes.
smaller and less
Okay.
oppressive. No electromagnetic energy here. All right, God
I
be with
said
you.
I sent you my phone number here, so you can get it.
Fantastic. Thank you so
Yofi.
much.
Okay,
Bye.
Shavua tov to everybody.
Toda again.
Bye bye.